Speaker, as someone who has been recognized for a lot of things, his fight on the Judiciary Committee, but tonight he's here to share and to stand up for First Amendment rights for religious freedom. Louis Gohmert from Texas. And Congressman Gohmert, thank you for being here.
Thank you, my dear friend Randy Forbes, for all that you do on behalf of religious freedom. And I know it's not merely Christian freedom, but it is religious freedom, and it is under attack. And when we look at what the Constitution says, I know it's already been read, but so often we forget the first word. We just blow right past the first word of the First Amendment, and that is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Why was it that they singled out Congress? Because they mentioned states in some of the other amendments. In the 10th Amendment, anything that's not prohibited to the states, that power is reserved to the states and the people. So why is it that they singled out Congress? It's because this was intended for Congress and not for the states. Because the people that voted for these amendments knew that every one of the states had some laws that dealt with some aspect of Christianity, whether it was the oath that was required to be taken, or in some cases a belief in Jesus Christ. There were all kinds of state and local university laws that had to do with religion, and that if you wanted to be part of this, you had to believe this way. It was supposed to be a restriction on Congress, and we've gotten so far afield from that. Now we think that we're not allowed to even bring up a hymn here in Congress, whereas my friend Randy Forbes know, Trent Franks, all know, right down the hall, the man who coined the phrase separation of church and state, Thomas Jefferson, as president, came to church every Sunday. He was in Washington, and on some occasions he brought the Marine band to play the hymns. It was the biggest church in Washington for much of the 1800s, right down the hall in what was the House chamber back then. And now look what's happened. We see these incursions on the freedom of belief, and Christians are persecuted and forced to endure the slams and the arrows that should never be endured. Like SEAL Team 6, for example, those heroic members that were put in harm's way in a situation they should never been put in Afghanistan after SEAL Team 6 was outed as the ones that took out Osama bin Laden. And you can see the DVD, a recording of the ramp ceremony. They have an imam come up in his language and do a Muslim prayer over the American flag draped caskets. And we know some of those guys were devout Christians. And he says a prayer that when you get the interpretation, basically it condemns them to hell, that they'll never defeat the Muslims, the followers of Allah. It turns out today we see persecution after persecution of Christians. When you look at the underpinnings of this nation, you know, it was Christians. About a third of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence were ordained Christian ministers. You know, you look at what drove Lincoln. It was coming closer and closer to a walk with God. Some of those powerful Christian messages ever delivered include the second inaugural address of Lincoln. Why? Because the Christian faith that he heard John Quincy Adams right down the hall talk about drove him to come back into politics and to get back involved to try to eliminate slavery. He knew that it was difficult for God to bless America when we were treating brothers and sisters by putting them in chains and bondage. And then look, the next big step toward true Christian brotherhood and sisterhood in America came from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What was he? He was an ordained Christian minister. And now, within the 50 years, it's become only acceptable to persecute Christians. And if you look, this administration, and so many have taken a stand, yes, it is an outrage that poisonous gas was used by anyone in the Middle East. But you don't hear the administration or others talking enough, including us in Congress, about the persecution of Christians. One article here that says Syrian rebels to Christians, flee or die. Article by Bob Unruh, used to be with the AP, and he talks about the report. Over and over, Christians were told, you either denounce your Christianity or die, and we've done nothing about it. That was written in June. We have article September 9th. The village of Mahulala has been taken over by Syrian rebels associated with al-Qaeda. They stormed the Christian center, offered local Christians a choice, conversion or death, as they screamed, Allahu Akbar. Well, there is too much persecution of Christianity. That was never supposed to be the case. That was what so many said would be the salvation of our little experiment in democracy. It's time to stand for freedom of religion, not freedom to persecute Christians from Washington. I appreciate my friend very much for yielding.
Thank the gentleman from Texas for his words. Wall Street